Hi. Oh,
Hi,
did
how are you?
you made it through the night?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. I have to tell you, not that I'm in any way proud of it, but I had my doubts about the hoopla before the things actually came together. So I'm not as surprised as you might imagine I would be.
Well, I don't, we don't even have I'm hoping that no one who watches this show is actually surprised by the following things: that Donald Trump is saying that he won, even though there's no actual count. These are typical strongman techniques that we see. Am I right, Professor Wolff?
Absolutely. This is, you got to give him points for consistency. He makes it up as he goes along in every situation. If there's some way to use it to advance his objective, well, then he does. He doesn't worry about whether it's true or not. He doesn't worry about whether 10 minutes later the facts will emerge that make it look like he's a liar. That's a different style of politics, and it is working really well in the United States, far better than most people would have expected. And I think, and I think the answer is, and the reason for it is that people are desperate. And when you are desperate, you grab on to whatever there is.
Mm-hmm.
If we are in a society, which I believe is the case, that is in an advanced state of decline, that our capitalist system isn't working for the vast majority of people, and they live that reality every day in the supermarket, on the job, at home, when they go to the bank and see how much is left in their account, and all the rest. You want somebody to get you out of this sinking ship. And what Biden and Harris offered was the same old, same old. They're part of the establishment. They have been all their political lives. They've never deviated in a major way from whatever the establishment there wanted. And people figured that out. And Mr. Trump is a noisy, blustery pretender. He promises to make us all great again, and it's all good, and he's winning everything. And if you're with him, you'll win. Look, it's thin, it's not very persuasive, but it is something. And there's an old rule in politics: you don't beat nothing with something. Excuse me, you don't beat something with nothing. You have to have something that is exciting, that is a plausible. No guarantees are required.
I think in this election, the something was like, not this. That that was the only something that he offered. And, as we continue to vote for every vote to be counted here, I'd like to, I'm so glad you were here. When I looked at the schedule and I saw that you were just regularly scheduled to be on this day, and it happened to be the day after the election, I thought that this would be an excellent time to talk about the intersection between capitalism and late stage capitalism as we are living through, and electoral politics. The nation came out in record numbers. Can you talk more about what you think is energizing the electorate to come out?
I think it's the same thing I said before. They are aware, the American people are aware that things are falling apart, that the old realities that they thought they could count on are not. Record numbers of people are moving their residence for all kinds of reasons. Record numbers of people are giving up on jobs they thought would take care of them for their lives. Everywhere you turn, the dominance of the old ways and of the United States within the world is shrinking. And Mr. Trump, who pretends that none of this is a problem, he hasn't convinced Americans of that. They're desperate. That's why they went out in large numbers. They didn't change their votes all that much. They went out in large numbers because they're getting more and more anxious, and rightly so, about their situation. I mean, for me, as an economist looking at this, I'm stunned again by how little the American people have been educated and trained over decades. And by the way, the responsibility for this is shared between the two parties, is shared especially by the universities and the mainstream media. They have colluded, and there's no other way to put it, in a kind of refusal to face hard realities that then require tough decisions. They talk like that, but they evade it as their major. So let me give you two examples. The first one is now about 40 years old, so there's really no excuse. Over the last 40 years, one country in the world has been systematically more successful in growing its economy than any other place on the planet. And that country is the People's Republic of China. I am not asking anyone to endorse them or to like them or to agree with many of the things they do. I don't, that's fine. But you can't use your disagreement with this or that aspect of a society to pretend that something isn't happening that is fundamental. The dominant economic growth story in the world is China. The proof of it is that virtually 2/3 of America's major corporations have figured that out and have moved their activities to China. Pepsi-Cola sells more drinks in China than it does in the US. General Motors sells more cars in China than in the US. And I could go on and on. This is the reality. Right now, in the global pandemic, the Chinese economy is growing and ours is shrinking. And that's true for Europe, too.
Richard, why are they doing so well?
Because they have an economic system that's different from ours. They give an enormous respect and deference to the central government. It's the job of the government to mobilize both private, because they have a huge private capitalist sector, to mobilize the resources of that private sector together with the government's resources in order to deal with whatever is an urgent problem. They thought it was an urgent problem to develop their economy. They mobilized all their resources and they did it really well. You know what else they decided to mobilize against or for? COVID-19. And that's why they've done so much better in managing that than we have. Wherever they turn, their system, and again, I am not endorsing it or anything, but you have to face when they decide we're going to focus on this, they mobilize and bring together their resources. We don't. We have half of our people wanting to believe there's no need to wear a mask rather than worrying about how to get masks to everybody who needs them. We have to, go ahead.
The Washington Post reported that the exit polls show that the propaganda has taken hold and that a good percent of Trump voters really believe that we have to choose between dealing with the pandemic or having a decent economy. My understanding is that we could deal with the pandemic and actually help the economy by, say, oh, I disappeared. My question was, how do we counter this narrative, and what's the reality here?
Well, the reality is, again, I don't know why I'm focusing on it. It's just one issue. But I'm going to take China again. China has a much better record than we do. It's a country that has 4 times the number of people we do and a tiny fraction of the number of COVID deaths that we do. I mean, wildly different. And they are doing better economically. They will have economic growth in the year 2020. We will have economic decline. So the notion that you have to choose, that's not a theoretical argument. I mean, in this country it is. But that argument has been settled around the world because that's why every other country is fighting the virus more aggressively than we are, because they've figured out that the economic and the public health are necessary for each other. You don't choose between them, since it's hardly good to have a job for a person who's dead. They don't need it anymore.
Yes.
There's something unspeakably grotesque in what's going on. I understand that capitalists in this country and in other countries They want people to come to work, because without your labor force, you don't make any profits. And if you understand capitalism, that's what it is. It's a system about profits. So they want people to go to work. And since they know that there are millions of us unemployed, if those that they hire get sick, they know where they can get replacements. And if that sounds ugly, good, because it is. For them, they don't want their profits to get lost. But for the population as a whole, for the economy as a whole, this is craziness. You have to have public health, or else you're not going to make it in any economic venture.
I don't understand how people could be so short-sighted, I guess is a charitable way of putting it. Just how do you not know that? That just seems okay. So in terms of the economic recovery that we're all hoping for, the IMF recently reported on how the recovery from the pandemic and the economic crash will be what they called long and uneven. Your thoughts about that?
Yes, the evidence is already there. We can see it around the world. We can see it around the United States. Once you have another resurge of the virus, which is what we're going through in the United States right now, as the Europeans are, as the Latin Americans are, and so on, it's going to devastate the economy again. We're locking down. We're closing our businesses. I learned from friends in Italy that the curfew now, I believe, starts at 6 p.m. in that country. You can't even go out. If you know, when people have dinner in Italy, it's after that.
They just finished lunch at 6
right.
p.m.
So, you know, you are living out the crazy notion that you can ignore this. You know, we have a population, and again, I think people understand that when Mr. Trump tells us that the solution is around the corner, even as it gets worse, everybody kind of sees that. And yeah, there's a core of people who live in La La Land who pretend it isn't so. But basically, they understand it. But they are so desperate. They want that job. They want that economy to come back. They want all that they think they lost to be brought back. And they're going to go with a politician who promises it, because that's a smidgen further down the road than the politician who doesn't.
I'm still in shock, because this politician that brought us this problem is the one who's promising that it's all fine, and half the people, I'm just like, why isn't this like 80% of the people versus 20 Trump nuts? 20% Trump nuts. It's this, the percentages, and even with the voter fraud and the disenfranchisement, the percentages, you know, there was the largest voter turnout in the history of the United States, and they're still counting votes right now. So that, I think, is heartening that people are actually like waking up. And
if I could interrupt, in 2016, Trump told us that he's riding a wave, and he knew it. And he told us that he could go out on Fifth Avenue in New York and shoot somebody, and people would still vote for him in droves. I think he was onto something. I think that he, in fact, went out, and in 4 years, he bears major responsibility for 230,000 dead COVID victims because of his failure to prepare for and to mobilize against this disease, with many more coming down the pike. And he still gets the votes. I think you're seeing a population that is desperate. Otherwise, they would have punished him for the kind of behavior he did. He promised to bring the coal industry back. He didn't. But West Virginia voted for him. He promised to bring the auto industry, up to a great new. He didn't do any of those things. He promised to bring manufacturing here. There's less manufacturing in the U.S. today than there was when he became president. I mean, none of it is happening. It's all bluster and PR and political theater, hyped by Fox, the usual. And people see it, but it doesn't, if you pardon me, trump their desperation. Their desperation is what he's riding on. That's
interesting. He created the desperation, or at least he, tipped it over the edge. It's not like he was the first one. And He created the desperation, and now he's riding the wave of it because of the propaganda machine we have here.
That's an old political game, and particularly for the Republicans. For the last 50 years, Republican politicians, often with Democrats helping them, it's not just the Republicans, eviscerated the minimum wage, transformed the economy from union to non-union jobs. They did all those things which hurt the standard of living and the lives of millions and millions of American workers. And then the same party that led to all of that stands up and says, we're the champion of the old traditional family. Is your family falling apart? Vote for the Republicans. We believe in and this was genius. They helped the business community that donates to the party by destroying the unions and destroying the good jobs and moving them abroad. And then they turned what they had done for the business community into an appeal to the mass of people suffering the dissolution of their families by having them believe that voting for a Republican would bring back what the Republican Party helped to destroy. This is political genius when you can work the hustle this way. You get to please your donors and you keep your voters. That's the name of the game. That's what the Democrats haven't figured out how to do.
Professor Wolff, let's talk about sort of the intersection, and we've been talking about this. You've hit on some of this. Our economic system, capitalism, shapes U.S. elections. How do elections, how do our elections compare to countries that are not solely driven or living through this late stage of capitalism? If there were, say, you have the organization democracy at work. If the workplaces were democratized, if there were, worker operated corporations here in the country, if we had, a social safety net that people understood was good for them. Somehow I don't understand how they can, I don't know. I know a lot of people who are about to lose their Medicare if Trump steals this election. So I have concerns for my friends. Talk about the other systems and what we're lacking here.
Well, that's really easy to do. And again, it's easy because of and I don't know a nice way to say this, the miseducation of the American people. Let me take Europe, which in many ways, Western Europe is most like us, broadly defined. In Western European countries, and here I'm talking about Britain, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Scandinavia, all that. In those countries, they have a radically different political system. It's called proportional representation. And here's how it works. If you're a political party that gets 10% of the vote, you automatically get an equivalent 10% of the seats in parliament, because the idea of democracy is if 10% of the people—
You're a bit frozen.
Sorry. Can you hear me now? Oops. Can you hear me now?
I'm sorry about that. I don't know what happened. Can you hear me now? I can hear you. We were just talking about Parliament and seats in Parliament. I'm sorry about that. We'll have to cut it in the post. We'll have to cut it in post.
Okay. So if you get 10% of the vote, you get 10% of the seats in Parliament, because the idea is 10% of the people want you and want their representatives to have a voice in making the laws. They don't run their elections the way we do, so that you can get 49% of the vote, but the other party gets the seats and you get no voice at all. That disenfranchises, in the European mind, that disenfranchises the 10% of the people who voted for whatever that party is. Number two, in all European countries, all of them, there are more than two parties. There are 3, 5, 6. It's bizarre here in the United States. We talk about wanting and believing in freedom of choice. You go into a supermarket, you get 8,000 varieties of breakfast cereal.
Yes.
In the drugstore, 20 kinds of toothpaste. But when it comes to political parties, somehow 2 is enough.
Yeah.
What kind of craziness is this? We don't have just 2 points of view. That's an insult to the American people. What are you doing? We should have multiple parties, and you get as much of a say in writing the laws as there are votes for your perspective that your party represents. We don't do any of that. We have a deal. We have 2 parties that have monopolized everything. They have worked very hard to create laws and rules that make it difficult or impossible for third parties or fourth parties to get off the ground. And it's the same thing as having 2 cars. So here we could have the equivalent. Okay, you can get a Ford or you can get a Chevy. You can pick any car you want as long as it's this Ford and that Chevy. We would all say, oh my goodness, there's no competition. But we don't seem to be able to do that when it comes to politics, which is arguably more important than what brand of car you have the choice to choose. It's really bizarre when you think about it, but it serves a purpose.
Professor Wolff, we recently report, and as we come to the end of our time, I do want to thank you for being here with us.
Whoops.
Some of the labor unions came out yesterday to say that if President Trump does what everyone knows he was going to do, as was predicted both by history and by progressive groups, he was going to prematurely claim victory and then try to stop any kind of ballot counting measure, which is what we see him doing. That a number of labor unions, including some groups who are part of the AFL-CIO, have decided they are going to go on general strike. This is coming from, I believe, some groups in Rochester and upstate New York. Your thoughts about the use of general strike to ensure that the democratic process is carried?
Can you hear me?
Oh, Professor Wolff, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
I'm sorry about, yeah, I can. I'm sorry about the tech difficulties. I'm not really sure exactly what's going on. Me
neither. Let me answer your question.
Yes.
It is very, very important. Labor union bodies in Seattle, Washington, in Rochester, New York, in Western Massachusetts, and some other places did exactly what you said. They threatened strike actions in support of a democratic political system. The importance of this is that the labor unions are still a major resource for progressive everything. And they have hesitated to get involved in politics to their detriment for 40 years. They have hesitated, for example, to do something about the horrific unemployment that we are still suffering and about which they have in the past gone into the streets. So I am among those welcoming and celebrating that they are beginning to recognize that they and the survival of the labor movement have a lot at stake in a democratic political system. Because typically one of the first things to go, and you can be sure of it under a Trump administration, are the liberties and freedoms of working people to organize and mobilize, which have been constricted and reduced under the first 4 years of Mr. Trump. So there's no reason to expect a different outcome. So yes, it's a very important step. If the labor unions are strong enough to begin, they could, if they stay with this, recapture the social position unions once had coming out of the Great Depression, when they were seen as the leaders, as the engine pulling the rest of the social movements and giving them the mass base in the labor movement that social movements need to be able to realize their objectives. So it's very, very important.
Professor Richard Wolff, thank you so much for joining us today. You can follow Professor Richard Wolff on the internet, on Twitter at Prof Wolff, PROFWOLFF. Find his economic update on YouTube, and I would even venture to say support it on Patreon, because Professor Wolff is pretty much the only one who is out there talking in the way that he is. He's getting a lot of requests, and I'm just glad that you could be here with us today.
Thank you, Juliana. I'm really glad to have these conversations. It's the most important thing to get into the media world. Thank
you so much, Professor Wolff. I look forward to the next time that you're on. I guess we'll have an actual count, or who knows what could happen. But stay well over the course of the next few weeks as we dive headfirst into an autocrat trying to take over.
Okay, thank you, Julia.
I mean, we're going to have to live through that, right? I apologize for the technical difficulties. I'm not sure what those were about. It was great to have Professor Wolff, as it always is. I mean, he doesn't really do electoral politics. He's not excited so much about one party or the other. He's an academic, and it's always good to take a step back and really see where we're at.